Welcome back to Unfiltered, Unspoken. And as you know, we're going to continue to share life experiences, all different walks, all different kinds. And we want to welcome Liz Entin to Unfiltered, Unspoken podcast. It is an honor to have you, Liz. And if you could introduce yourself for us and let the audience know what they're going to get a piece of today.
Sure. Thank you so much for having me. It's an honor to be here to share my story. So, my name is Liz Entin. I am author of WTF Just Happened, a sciencey-skeptic explores grief, healing, and evidence of an afterlife, and the podcast, WTF Just Happened, all about the afterlife, no woo. And so I appreciate you having me.
Thank you for coming again. So, excuse me, we always like to start at the beginning and take it back to, your origins and pretty much how you came to be where you are now. So how was life growing up with, family? What was your home structure like? Tell us a little bit about that.
So I grew up in New York, in Manhattan. I am an only child, and I never liked that. That part was always pretty difficult. I always wanted siblings, but I was very close with my parents. I was a pretty outgoing kid. I overall had a lot of friends. I hated school. I was in very high pressure schools that I don't think were a good match for me. But when I did what I liked to do, I had a really good time. I liked to do art, have play dates with friends. I love dolls in my doll's house. I love to draw and make fun things, and I liked some sports like gymnastics. And I liked ballet. So that was, I wouldn't say especially great at either of them, but that sums up my young childhood, I'd say.
Okay, perfect. So going through childhood through the high pressure schools, did that cause any differences in your life or any changes?
Yeah, I mean, it was my whole childhood, kindergarten through high school. I definitely think I think it's formed a lot of who I am in a good and bad ways. I feel like there's a lot I've had to overcome. And it's also, I think, given me an empathy and realization that I never want to live that way again. So I think that's made me realize that I really do want to be true to myself and pursue things that mean something to me rather than fitting into a mold. And also, I know how unhealthy it was for me to work insane hours at something I didn't especially like and what that did to my body. So I think it's made me very aware of my health, my sleep, my balance, as well as pursuing what I really love. And definitely some obstacles to overcome from, I think, a lot of the messages I got there. But, I don't have anything else to compare it with. So
That's all right.
That was my life.
Did your parents kind of fall in line or get on board with the fact that, that really wasn't your favorite environment or the things that you actually did like to do and experience versus, the very structured type of schooling it seems like you were into? Did they kind of help you explore other things or did they kind of push more of the education side?
They pushed that school side. And I think it was such a strong message and so enmeshed that I almost didn't realize there were other options. I mean, they had best of intentions. They realized when I was older it was a mistake, a pretty big mistake, but they also really thought this was going to make my future. And, they had me later in life, so they had a lot of more of the old-fashioned, in certain ways, old-fashioned values. In certain ways, gave me a lot of freedom and were very respectful. But when it came to education, they really believed if I followed this very intense academic path, that would really help my future, when I think it in a way did the opposite in certain ways. Although, as for the reasons I said before, I feel like I've overcome that in a lot of ways. Once I got to college, I was like, I'm not doing that path anymore. I'm going to a more laid back college. I'm having a balanced life. And I think they saw how much healthier I looked, how much happier I was. And I think they realized it was really a mistake. But I don't think I knew as I got a little older it was a mistake as a little kid. I was like, I'm so unhappy, get me out of here. But they said, oh, I'd be grateful one day. And that I think, I was getting the message that this will make my future. So, by the time I was like 14, I believed that and just thought, okay, let me just get through these years. But now definitely, like, in the end, my dad knew it was a mistake and my mom knows it was a big mistake. But, I mean, I try to talk about it a little bit. So if anyone else is listening who has a child who says, I think there's a lot of kind of marketing done that if you follow this path, you'll be happy. But I don't necessarily, I am hoping any parents hearing this would realize that there's multiple paths. And I think there's more understanding of that today than when I was a child.
And I tell folks, and you can chime if I'm wrong, correct me please, that sometimes we live through the dreams through our parents' eyes, the vision that they see for us, which it puts pressure, and we do things like differently. Do you felt as though you were living through the vision of your parents, even though they wanted good, but do you feel like it was a vision for your academics piece of it?
Definitely. 100%. Yes. I think, as I said, my dad had me a lot later in life. So he had seen, which was true to his time, a lot of, a very sexist world. Not that we still don't deal with sexism, but, he saw another level. So he thought I needed all this for a certain empowerment. And he'd had a very, like, gone to the quote unquote best schools. And then my mom, I guess, just thought she hadn't. And I think she thought, wow, I'm so lucky. I'm going to be so happy when I had this. She kind of would look at what I was doing and would have thought that would have been a dream of hers to get to do that as a kid. So, I'm grateful I ended up not having to go to a boarding school, because I think if I'd had to live full time in one of those schools, I don't know if I could have psychologically handled it. It was really hard as it was. So I've been listening to some stories of people kind of overcoming, like, a lot of early day school traumas of very intense schools, and the people in the boarding school seem to have had it the worst because there's no escape. So I'm glad it wasn't a boarding school, which, some people I knew were sent to those. But with some people, and I don't want to say some of these schools might be really good for some people, but there are plenty of people they are not good for. So.
Absolutely. So what was kind of going into college like? What did you, choose as your major? How did you kind of develop as a person? Did you experience any significant, moments in time during college?
Yeah. I went to UT Austin. I loved Austin. I mean, there's a lot I could say about Texas, especially right now, but I do love Austin. And I just felt it was like very healing. It was very fun. It was finally getting to be really balanced. Like, the huge pressures and exhaustions of my schools lifted. Everyone was so relaxed and fun. I studied communications. I felt I could actually, it wasn't such a grind, and I was able to actually learn instead of just, like, pump out so much content that I felt like my other schools were like. I was actually able to, like, sleep and digest stuff. I, of course, had a lot of fun, like, drank a lot on the weekends. I mean, I did that some in high school too. Not like sitting alone in my room drinking. It was, like, high school parties. I don't want to give people the impression I was, like, chugging a bottle of vodka alone in my room. But yeah, so I had, like, that fun, but I also met really kind people. I felt it was a very balancing, learning to, like, heal myself. Like, despite mentioning all the drinking, I also got really into organic food. So I was also, like, physically healthy. I got, more into exercise. And so I feel it was a very healing as well as very fun time.
Okay. And I want to know, did you ever get caught when you were younger drinking or partying when you weren't supposed to?
That's what my parents were really cool about. They didn't think I wasn't supposed to. They had more of a European, they're not European, but they definitely, especially in New York City, like, had much more of a European values set about drinking. So it wasn't like anything to be caught with. They didn't think it was wrong. And I kind of agree with them about that. I mean, Also in New York City, driving wasn't an issue at all. So there wasn't, so there was nothing to get caught, really. They didn't really consider it like wrong or rebellious. And it was very normal in sort of like the New York teen culture, and which I think is good. Like I've noticed in New York City, and I spent a little time in London, like places where people don't drive. I think it's a really good thing, because by the time I hit college and was in a place where everyone had cars, I was like, I would never drive drunk ever. And was like, so I think for me, it was a good thing. You know, I mean, it was more for having fun rather than numbing. And yeah, so no, there wasn't really anything to get caught about, if that makes any sense.
Wonderful. And what did you take your degree and do? What did that kind of bounce you into after college?
So I worked in fashion for a little while. I started interning in college in the summers. I started interning in fashion. I started blogging about fashion. Then I turned the blog into a fashion startup that sold emerging fashion designers from around the world. I assisted fashion stylists and interned at fashion magazines before I started assisting. So that was originally the route I wanted to go down, was the fashion industry. Again, I mentioned as a kid, I loved art. So I really wanted to do an artistic field. And I remember I'd found all these old dolls. I used to make all these doll clothes for them when I was a kid. And I was always really into, I guess, visual artistic stuff. So that's how I ended up in the fashion industry for a while.
So what made you switch from the fashion industry to, I guess, what was next?
Ooh, why did I leave fashion? That's so I was focusing less on styling as I got more into having my fashion startup, and then I was getting consulting jobs with other startups. And I just became more interested in the business startup world rather than fashion. There's a lot I absolutely love about the fashion industry. I love the art. I love the beauty. There's a lot I don't like as well. There could really be some, I mean, this is a little stereotypical, but there really were some mean people. I mean, I guess they are everywhere, but fashion has its own. And what I realized I really loved and felt passionate about was never going to make much money in the fashion industry anyway, which was the very, very artistic fashion. That's not going to make as much money. And I guess I just became really more interested in business and startups and kind of the idea of making something out of nothing that's never been thought of before. And not that fashion doesn't have that with some of the art and design, but I just got really excited about kind of the limitlessness of the startup world. And so I guess I had my fashion startup till my dad passed. And then I was just so depressed. And I feel like when you go through a trauma like that, you do change. And I just realized when I started to come out of like the fog of early grief, fashion just was not what I was as excited about as I had been previously, which I wasn't expecting, but that just was how I felt.
So you're kind of, it seems like from listening to you, your first taste of grief was the passing of your father, if that's correct.
My first grief to that level. I know some people minimize this, but it was very hard for me. I'd lost animals before that who were incredibly important to me. I guess, again, I talked about being an only child. So my childhood animals were like my siblings, and so that was incredibly hard. But losing my dad was the hardest grief I've been through and the most transformative.
So what? I'm gonna jump back and then Sid probably will chime back into your dad. But
Sure.
being an only child and then losing an animal, because I know what it's like to lose an animal, and it's like my child. What are some of the traumas of being an only child and you're connecting with your animal that you went through, grieving from that piece of it?
The grieving my animals, you mean? or just being the trauma of an only child in general? Or are you talking specifically about losing my animals?
Yeah, specifically grieving, because the first piece of grieving was losing your animal. So, and I know being
Yeah.
an only child with no one else to confide in, as a sibling, your animal. So, what are some of the grieving, some of the grieving that you went through with losing your animals?
So I had, when I was really young, I had 2 cats, and Snapper and Sassy, and they were like, I'd come home and, I didn't have other kids to play with. I didn't have siblings. In New York City, you don't have the yard where all the kids run out and play. So it was like coming home alone. And this was before, school had gotten so intense where I would just be doing homework. But even then, I still had these 2 cats there. And I would like, it felt like, my mom worked a lot of nights, and my dad would like, had a lot of other stuff he always had to do at night, like catching up on like, I mean, he did investments in stocks. So he was always like having to catch up on stuff at night. And I had my 2 cats mainly when I was home that I would come home to and hang out with them. And they were just, I mean, a weird combination of almost like siblings and babies, because they're cats. They're like little babies. But, I remember like dressing my cats in dolls' clothes and having them play with the dolls. And when they were kittens, like putting them in my doll's house. And, I got to be a child with them. And then when so losing them. And then later in my life, a dog and other cats, I've had since then. I've started rescuing cats and dogs when I got a little older. So I've lost, quite a few animals, but losing those I mean, every single one has just been devastating. Some is the ones I've gotten when I was a little older have been like losing a child. Not to exactly compare that, because, working in grief, I do know people who have actually lost children, but, it triggers some of that same, like, you want to protect this little animal and you can't, and this thing is going to happen to it and it's going to die no matter what you do, and it feels like a little baby to you. And then losing my childhood cats, it just felt like, I don't know, I'd known them basically almost my whole life, and suddenly just not having them in the family it just felt like this huge emptiness and sadness, and just like the space. I mean, it still sometimes feels weird when I'm home at my childhood home and just my mom's here. I mean, I have other animals now when I stay here, but it still feels like the core of this home and like the warmth and heart of it, where these cats, because it made it, instead of just me with adults, it was like these 2 little creatures I could play with, and they'd always sleep with me and like cuddle, and I felt like I really knew them and they really knew me. And like whenever I think of my childhood home, those cats are always here. So it was just like a big, heartbreaking, empty ache.
No, understood. We definitely have close connections with our pets, and I haven't had a chance to own a cat, but the ones I've been around, I completely understand. So, but we're gonna hop back forward just a little bit. And what age were you when you lost your father, and what actually took place and what transpired that made it so hard for you?
So I was 26, and I think, not having siblings, not yet with having like my own children or a husband, it's like, this is my family. We don't have extended family that we're super engaged with, and it just, so I think, yeah, I think that like, it's just like it's really just in the family that's the family that I spend the most time with, really. My parents had me when they were older. I never had grandparents. Like, we have extended family, but we don't spend that much time with them. So it wasn't like they were a key part of my childhood. And so it was just a huge loss. I mean, I think it's always horrifying to lose a parent or anyone you really, really love. But I do hope like there is an offset if you have your next tier of your family at that point. And I would imagine, you know, like my own children, husband, like, I mean, I do hope to have all that at some point. And my, and then, so it was just a big loss, you know, and I think, yeah, I do imagine it would have been different if I'd had siblings. It's just like a bigger safety net and a base of safety. So, kind of,
was there any like particular circumstances of which you lost him that made the situation any worse, or was it kind of like a natural cause type of thing?
It was a natural cause. He had a stroke, and to be honest, it seemed like it was a mild stroke at first. So I was like, that's obviously scary. Like, no matter what, your dad has a stroke. Anyone has a stroke, that's scary. But I'd known other people who had strokes and they were fine. So I thought he was going to need physical therapy. Like, that's what they kind of said at first, but they couldn't really figure out. He was like still not coherent the first night after the stroke. And like, so it was like this weird combination of being instantaneous because he was just never the same. He never came home. He went into hospitals and then rehab, but he wasn't really doing the rehab. And then he went into, you know, like back and forth hospitals, rehab. And it was just, he was never himself again. So it was like here one day and then like half here, you know, it's not like when someone's had a heart attack or is in an accident, but it's not like someone has cancer for 3 years, you know, and so it was like this weird combination of both of them, both like instant and not. And I don't want to say one would be worse than the other. I think every single horrible loss has its own traumas about it. And so I don't think one way would have been easier than another. I think it just the aspects that made it so hard. The specific one was like the combination of here one day and then not, and also those ups and downs, hopes and not, and watching him what looked like really suffering for, I guess, 3 months.
So did you have to go back? I guess you're watching all of this back and forth in the hospital because my mother had a massive stroke too, and we spent a lot of time in the hospital, and she still. They call it a dead side. So one side of her body she drags. So she only has one side that's functioning. So I definitely understand what you're going through, and it's probably because we spent a lot of time in the hospital. So I can only imagine for you the shift in your life to have to be back and forth in the hospital. You're used to coming home to see your dad, but now you're back and forth in the hospital and rehabilitations for your dad. How did that change your life? And
oh God, I mean, I just felt frozen. I felt terrified. I felt sad. I felt sort of like panic and then hopeful. I was like living with roommates then. I didn't want to be around roommates. Like I wasn't really friends with them. I didn't really tell them what was going on. So I didn't really know them very well. I just moved home and was with my mom, and it just felt really just so deeply empty being in the apartment without him. It still feels empty when I'm here without him. And it was just like every day. I mean, it was like became the focus of my life. Like any other little thing I was doing was completely irrelevant. It was like, this was literally the only thing in the world that mattered. And going there kind of with hope every day and being like, oh, you know, he should be like, you know, obviously doesn't always happen. 100% of us die, but there's this thought where until someone passes away, every time they get sick, and you watch the progress of him getting better. So that's, and again, I'd known other people's parents had strokes and they'd gotten better. So it was like kind of preparing myself for the progress of watching him get better, and just like the like terrors and like every weird feeling that I can't even identify all of them when he was not getting better. So, and just like, I mean, it just sort of is all consuming, and it's like physical and it's emotional, which I guess emotions are physical in our bodies, you know? So it was just like, it's hard to find words, but it's just like this heavy, like combination of feeling like so weighed down, I couldn't even move. And then like also this like panicked terror where like I couldn't sit still. It was like this weird combination of both, you know, if that makes any sense. And just like wanting time to move on, so, like so I could know he would get better, but then also terrified because I'm like, what if he doesn't get better? And just like watching the progress going down the path of him not getting better, just as it sank in, just, I don't know, just feeling so incredibly helpless and just like, I can't do anything about this. And, you know, you want to be able to do something about the things that are most important to you. And this is like so far probably the most important, or one of the most important things in my life.
Absolutely. What was the next, kind of pivotal moment for you? Was there anything in particular that, momentarily brought you out of that funk after his passing? Or, did it maybe cause like a whole existential crisis and you changed gears totally? But
All
yeah,
of the
let us
above.
know how that happened.
All of the above. Yeah, it was a combination of like, well, that's when I started researching evidence of an afterlife. And one thing I don't think I'd mentioned in my childhood was we never believed in God or afterlife. I mean, I was just in a very secular culture and area of New York. So this stuff was just irrelevant. It wasn't like we were the town atheists the way you sometimes hear of. Like, I didn't even associate religion so much with God. I was just associated with culture. And I always said I was half Jewish, half Christian, probably a little more Jewish because that's such a strong culture. Biologically, half Jewish. My dad's Jewish, mom Christian. Neither of them believed. It was just like very cultural. And again, Judaism's just such a strong culture that was like a big part of me, but I never associated it with God. So like we never believed in an afterlife. No one I knew. If they did, it was just no one really talked about it. And you know, the only people I'd heard talk about an afterlife were more when I went to college and in the South. And, you know, people talk about like anyone who believed would like mention maybe God or heaven. And none of that seemed remotely believable to me. And there was some negative stuff that went along with some of those beliefs too. I wouldn't say my friends had those negative beliefs, but a lot of like what they'd been raised in that they were trying to not align with had some pretty not so respectful of people's choices, beliefs. And so I just never, I mean, it just seemed like just, you know, pure fantasy. And so then to start discovering that there was actual scientific data and evidence that showed there might be an afterlife. I mean, to think that there's no chance of that, there's really nothing better. Like that is better than finding out you had $1 trillion in your bank account. And I'd be pretty happy if I had $1 trillion in my bank account, you know? So it's just like, and it seemed like more realistic that I would wake up and find $1 trillion in my bank than it would be that there was an afterlife. And so when I started finding out evidence that there was an afterlife, I mean, that's probably the best thing beyond what I could have ever imagined. So the combination of that with the worst thing happening that I knew for a fact was going to happen one day, it was just so intense. I mean, it was like the worst I've ever felt in my life with this weird, the best I've ever felt in my life without, it was so weird. I mean, I was just in agony, but then like, oh my God, like, I mean, yeah, if anyone listening, like, could even imagine what that would feel like to start discovering that we could actually have an afterlife or, you know, a different forms of continuing our life when your whole life you just assumed when you died and that was it. And there was this sort of like existential dread I'd always had that I hadn't known I'd had because I hadn't had anything to compare it with. So it was like some part of me really eased up while I was also in like just like unlivable agony of missing my dad.
So, because we always want the audience to see like some of the things that you went through. What did the grieving cause? Like eating or anxiety or depression or stress? Like, what are some of the pieces of grieving that you went through and how did it affect you?
I mean, all of the above. Eating, it was like there'd be days, I think, especially when we were waiting for the news on him, where I just felt like I couldn't even eat. It was just like such an unbearable feeling in my stomach, like terror, like frozen terror. I couldn't eat. And then when it became clear, like the suspense was over and it was clear he wasn't going to make it. Then after he passed, it was like intense eating. Like all I wanted to do was lie in bed and eat like sweets and ice cream, like things that could give me like this little bits of pleasure, and just like this complete, like what felt like maybe an abyss, and my whole body hurt. It felt so heavy and then exhausted. Like I was so tired, but I was scared to sleep because I was so frightened of that feeling of in the morning, which would happen sometimes, or middle of the night, like that few seconds where I'd forget and be like, oh, why do I feel so bad? Oh yeah. Not like you actually forget, but there's like that split second when you wake up and you're like, wait, is this real? Oh my God. And just like that coming into reality and having it just hit me. And it just felt like I couldn't even stand up. It was like weights were in my whole body and everything physically hurt. Like to stand up, to walk across the room just hurt. And I felt like almost doubled over. Like I felt everything through my whole body. Like my limbs felt like weights, but like my stomach, I felt everything probably the worst. Just like this, like there was this like horrible like weight in my stomach. And it was just, I had to find like pleasure in the little things I could, which involved like eating ice cream. So I definitely gained a lot of weight, and I was just like, I don't care. I just want to lie in bed. And I was also realizing I was just like working was so hard, like just working for like half an hour, and then my body, I couldn't even think. I felt like so heavy. I wasn't really worried about money because I'd moved home, so I didn't really have bills or rent, and which was, I guess, really a nice thing to have. And it just sort of like, there aren't even necessarily always words. I think it was sort of like this despair and then like real loneliness, because I think our society's really bad at like accepting emotions, especially like unpleasant ones like grief. It's like there's this huge misconception that like excuse me, the best thing you can do is rush through grief, ignore it, go back to your life, get back to yourself. But that's not. And so that made me so lonely. And the people I always thought would be there the most were not. And they were very correcty. And that made me, it just was so, made everything worse. And it was very like, but yeah, the ideal in our society is that getting through grief as fast as possible and getting back to yourself is the best thing and healthiest thing. But like, you're a different person. Like I felt, for me, like I couldn't go back to who I was. And I have come to think that is not, and I don't want to use the word should. For me and many other people, that is not aligned as the ideal. Often grief, and I hate to use the word opportunity because it's just hell, but like, let's be honest, everyone's going to go through grief. Like 100% of us die, like nothing you can do about that. So I really think I would say for the majority of people that I have spoken to, myself included, the healthiest way to experience grief is it's like you're not getting back to yourself. You're evolving if you're going to let it process how maybe the ideal way. It's not about getting back to your old self, but processing it and becoming who you are, the new you, or yourself with this whole new world experience. Because who I was before in my old life does not work for who I am now. And that would not have been the best thing for me. And I think a lot of the pressure of get back to yourself, get back to your old life, and that's the healthiest. Like, and that pressure coming from so many people around me was very, very, very lonely. And in a way, and it's one of the reasons I like to talk about this, is I hope that changes, because what a missed opportunity for people to connect during these times on a deeper level, which involves respecting and kind of going along with people on their journey and being like, okay, well, maybe you over here getting back to your job like the next week and back to aspects of your life is the best thing for you. Maybe like you over here, it's just like collapsing and not doing anything for quite a few months and reassessing who you are. There's just really like having more of a guide and acceptance and being there with people to respect that there's absolutely no right way. There's absolutely no wrong way. And just kind of more supporting people as they figure out what they need to do to get through something that really no one else can understand. Even if you've been through grief yourself, like it's everyone kind of has different needs. So no one can fully understand another person's grief.
Well said. Definitely well said. I kind of wanted to, I had a little question when you said it, but with learning things about the afterlife, I guess what is some of the most significant information you acquired, or something that just, mind blown once you found out?
Oh my God, as I call them, the what the fucks.
Yes.
Number one, so for some of the first stuff is there is a whole department at the University of Virginia called the Division of Perceptual Studies that studies this phenomena. Like, people think of this as spiritual and belief-based and have a little bit of faith. Like, that's what most people would think if you say, what do you think about an afterlife? I'd say 99% of us think that, and some people have faith and find great comfort in it. And I tend to speak to the people who do not, because that's why they're drawn to my book, and they're like, oh my God, I've needed, some tangible hope. Because people who don't have any faith and don't believe stuff, it's not like we're like, oh, I'm so proud I feel this way. It's like, it's hell. It's horrible. You're just like, it's not that everyone's grief isn't horrible, but it's like there's a hopelessness on top of it. And that I think maybe people who think you'll see your loved ones again one day don't feel, or people who are terminally ill themselves. So that's why I first of all found, the very first thing I found was Dr. Jim Tucker and the late Dr. Ian Stevenson. And they were our professors at the University of Virginia teaching psychiatry and child psychiatry. And Dr. Tucker, the one who's still living now, is a child psychiatrist, as well as professor of psychiatry, UVA. And then within UVA, he is part of the Division of Perceptual Studies. Now, they study cases of kids with past life memories, and they go check out the memories and match them. And these kids, some of them know stuff that are just absolutely inexplicable, and they match them up with a previous personality. And there's even one child who had, I'm going to do a very, very brief summary of it. So if you're hearing this and you're like, oh, there's no way, you've got to read the full case, because I'm not doing it justice, but we don't have like 10 hours. So this child had memories of being a World War II pilot. Dr. Jim Tucker went in, they studied the case. I mean, they checked out. He knew things he could not have known. He was like 3 years old, knew all this stuff about airplanes, knew all this stuff about World War II that he should not have known. He also was playing with like this toy airplane as if it was having a plane crash again and again. And Dr. Tucker said he was playing the way a child plays out a real life trauma. Like if a child witnesses a accident, they'll keep playing it out this exact way rather than like typical child play. So long story short, they match him up to a person who passed away. All these facts matched. He ended up meeting now old elderly men who had been his friends when he was the previous personality and part of the Air Force troop with him. They shared memories. He met his sister, and they had conversations and shared memories. And this is, I mean, that is probably one of the strongest cases, but there is case after case that checks out through data-based studies. And that was the first like bit of research I started to learn about. I was just like, how? This is insane. And then I found researchers that studied, such as Dr. Bruce Grayson, also through University of Virginia, studies near-death experiences. And these are people who've pass away for a period of time and then are medically resuscitated. And they would share, the strongest cases were them sharing experiences of being out of their body and then seeing things, giving information that's verified, like conversations that happened in another room. I mean, there was a massive body of people who've had near-death experiences. Not all cases are verified, but there was also a huge consistency, like seeing a light, talking to deceased loved ones. There's a phenomena amongst that called Pekindarian, where some of the people who had near-death experiences, amongst relatives that they knew were deceased would see somebody else, and they were like, who was not, they thought deceased, and found out that person had died while they were in their coma once the person came back. And these weren't only elderly people they would see. Like one boy, tragically, while he was a young boy, like high school maybe, I don't remember what had happened to him, but he went into a coma, passed away for a little bit, was resuscitated, and he was like, I saw my great-grandparents, I saw my grandparents. He's like, I don't know why my sister was there. And tragically, his sister had been in a car accident the same day he was in the hospital and passed away. And the parents didn't even know at that point, because no one, I guess this must have been before cell phones. I don't know when this occurred, but because nobody could reach them because they were so busy in the hospital with their son. And so there are multiple cases like that. And then psychic mediums. There's the Windbridge Institute with Dr. Julie Beischel and Mark Bacuzzi, and they're doing up to quintuple blinded studies on psychic mediums who are getting phenomena up to like 90% accuracy on people, but it has to be specific. Like most people could probably give someone an accurate medium reading saying like, oh, you have like 3 great-grandparents, more than that on the other side. And, they really love, someone who studied cold reading give an accurate reading, but these have to be, they're getting very specific, like details about someone's deceased loved one, their career, hobbies, specific memories. And these are being done under blinded conditions. And when I put all that together, plus some personal experiences, it's just, I don't even have the words, because it is astounding. It is showing that there is something going on that is absolutely inexplicable by our current understanding of consciousness and science.
So I think I have a multiple question, because I do believe in afterlife, and some folks don't, but I've experienced folks in my dreams and next to me, and if I feel something in the room, I can feel it's a presence in the room. So some folks believe, some folks don't have the experience, but I do know folks that do. So I'm not going to discredit anything that you're saying, right? But what I want to ask is, because I do believe, what did that do? Because I know originally in the beginning, you say your dad was Jewish, your mom was Christian. There really wasn't religion in the home, but now faith comes in. So does your new experience create a different perspective? Is it just faith, or is God in the picture now, or just
No faith. No faith. This
no
is
faith?
data.
Okay.
This is data and evidence. It's research
Uh-huh.
being conducted by labs and universities. I mean, I've only talked about a tiny portion of the research that's out there.
Mm.
There's research on other ways that just show our consciousness interacts with our brains, like, influences objects. And I mean, yeah, these are studies being conducted in research labs and universities. And there's just piles and piles of stories. There's anecdotal evidence of people reporting phenomena with a consistency. And sure, you can't believe everybody, but enough anecdotal evidence keeps coming in. There's something going on. And then I've had some of my own experiences. So no, none of this is faith. Faith means feeling something and just believing it without evidence and data. So it seems to be a preponderance of evidence that it seems most logical we survive bodily death in some way. And I've never seen anything that would relate to anything like a god, at least any god I've heard the definition of. Some people maybe who define a god as like, is there some intelligence that's much more intelligent than us that is not in a physical form? Yes, but is that the highest level? I don't know. And is there a highest level? I don't know. Like, I've just never seen anything that would align even close to anything called a god in terms of the gods defined in religion, if that makes sense.
It definitely does. Now, what other, outside of, we talked about, kind of the paranormal issue and kind of getting through grief. Are there any other topics your book talks about that you kind of learned in this journey and put down on paper?
I mean, just lots and lots about scientific evidence of an afterlife. I'm writing a second one that's coming out fairly soon, and I'm recording the audiobook for this one. There's just so much. I think a thing this book gets into is that I know I did touch upon, but an aspect of grief that often you really change. Like, this talks about some new friends that I made along the way, and how some people I had to let go from my life, and about, I guess, just really, yeah, something I tried to just touch upon in a very natural way of how it applied to me, about just the difference when people just respect how your grieving process is. And again, that's not something that I just don't think that's talked about that much. There's so many books on like healing your grief, which some of them might be like lifesavers for somebody, but yeah, I guess the aspect of grief, of just how it's totally different for everybody, and you just have to respect everyone's process, even if it scares you, even if you think this way is wrong. I'm not talking about someone goes and like does super self-destructive behavior, like, starts taking a bunch of drugs and like drinking and then driving, but like within reason, you have to really respect how people do it. And I'd say the main things of the book, yeah, it's about like the evidence of an afterlife, and how just going from how much, as I accumulated some of the evidence, how shocking it was, and just remarkable people I met along the way, and just how devastating loss is. And
So experiencing the afterlife, believing in your new belief, the afterlife piece of it. Have you ever experienced any afterlife besides, or the stories, or seeing, or maybe even your dad? Did your dad come back and visit you?
yes. So I always say I don't believe in an afterlife. I'm not 100% convinced. I just think there's a preponderance of evidence that it
Yep.
seems to be the most likely answer. I was trying to stay away personally from the word belief. So I've had, yeah. I mean, I think most likely I've had medium readings where I give a fake name, I hide everything, Google Voice number, have a friend use their credit card or Venmo, and they've known stuff about my dad that they just could not have known. And I mean, some were even on the phone, if anyone's worried about facial recognition technology. Also, he passed in 2015. Like, facial recognition technology was not able to do this like in 2016 when I was getting all my readings shortly after his passing. And also, it's not that good. I have someone I spoke to about all this who's going to be on one of my podcast episodes. So like, it can't just give you all this specific information about a person. So yeah, I've had really strong medium readings. I've gotten what I would call signs from my dad. I've had dreams, actually a really interesting dream where an animal visited me that I think was pretty verified. I saw my dad once. I saw an animal, and that was verified. And yeah, so I mean, I'm happy to share some of those stories if that you think your listeners would like that, or
Yeah, because I want to know what animal you saw that represented that you knew it was your dad.
oh no, it wasn't my dad, it was my
Yeah,
animal. So
yeah, no,
but it
no,
was
I was saying, oh, sorry. So through the animal, how did you figure out the connection?
oh no, I was visited by an animal who passed away. It was just verified. So
Oh,
yeah. So I can tell the story of the animal because it was verified. I can tell, like, once I just saw my dad standing over me, and it was really strong. And I jumped because I was so surprised. And I wish I'd like tried to interact with him. And then he went away. I can't prove that wasn't me, like, semi dreaming, but people talk about that, and some have gotten verification with that type of what people will call visitations. Now, I tell the animal story because it was verified twice. Once I was half asleep. They call it like the hypnagogic state. And they say this is when people can get a lot of like like mediumship type information, even those of us like who are not mediums. And I saw my cat, Simba, and she was really strong. It was like purring, her full personality. And I said to her, Simba, like, I really feel like you're here, but I need evidence. Like, I'm not going to believe this. The next morning, I got a message from a medium that I was friends with. And they wrote, I had a really strong dream about you and a cat. And I hadn't posted this cat on social media. I hadn't told these mediums at all about like my animals. Like, I was really careful not to tell mediums anything. And this medium was like, I had a dream about my cat. And then she goes on to describe my cat. She was like, I saw this cat following you around everywhere like a dog. Did your cat do that? I was like, yes. And all these characteristics of my cat. And, you know, this part isn't the most scientific, but I trusted her and I sent her a photo of my cat. And she was like, that cat, but bigger, a little fatter. So I sent her a photo of my cat, that cat when it was younger and it was a lot fatter. She's like, that was the exact cat. And I believe her. And I was like, holy shit. And then this cat visited another time because I had a cat and a dog at that point. And we, Simba and Peanut, and we called them the twins. And I had gotten them pretty young too. After my early childhood cats had passed, we got this cat and dog, and we called them the twins. They were inseparable, same color, same size, just a cat and a dog, but like adored each other. And the cat passed shortly before the dog, about a year before the dog. And I was sitting on my bed, and I would always see, like, I couldn't tell them apart if I saw them out of the corner of my eye. So I saw my dog, like, out of the corner of my eye run around the corner. But then I looked up and my dog was sitting on my feet. And I was like, what? I swear I just saw her run around. And I saw her looking suddenly and perking up where I thought I had just seen her run. And she leaps up with like her tail going a mile a minute and goes running around the corner as if she'd seen the cat. And anytime she saw the cat, she'd leap and run like that. And they would just like run to each other. So I thought those were pretty verified.
And it definitely sounds like it. Like, I could believe that. I can definitely believe that. Now, Demetria, do you want to ask your final, and then I will go into shameless plug?
Absolutely. I wanted to know if you can give the audience a couple tips on how to start the journey to healing from grieving, some of the things that you've done to help you through the grieving process.
Yeah, sure. Well, I'm just going to preface, probably after everything I said in this, no one will be shocked to hear that I'm saying this. This worked for me. I'm not telling you this will work for you, but this worked for me. Number one, learning all about an afterlife, getting medium readings, looking for signs from my dads. I got some amazing signs. For me, that was the number one thing that helped my grief. Number two, I would say, really be honest with yourself about what you need. Like, grief is really, really, really shitty. It's horrible. You don't have to be happy. You don't have to tell yourself, oh, you know, I shouldn't be feeling this bad. And, or whatever things, or listening to other people around you telling you you're doing it wrong. You're not doing it wrong. There's no right or wrong way. There's some people that, like, I don't know, have a loss and they're totally fine. And for like the first year, then suddenly a year and a half later, they're like collapse. There's some, you know, I mean, there's some people that absolutely do follow the exact traditional how you're supposed to grieve. I mean, everyone just has their own way. So don't judge how you're experiencing your grief, and experience it, and surround yourself with people who respect that. And three, I guess there's just no timeline. Everyone tells you there is. I remember, and I've talked about this with some other people, hearing that year one's the hardest. You get through year one, you'll feel better. No, like, I suddenly felt really good for part of year one. There's a little part, not really, I guess, finding all the afterlife stuff. Then suddenly, like, year two, I had like a month where I just felt horrible again. And suddenly, like, now I suddenly had a week where I felt horrible again. It's been 8 years. So also time gets really, really distorted. I'm like, no, it hasn't been 8 years. Like, it feels like 2. Like, how is that possible? Like, I've really mentally distorted time. And almost everyone I know who's experienced a strong loss has noticed the same thing. So that's just my personal, what I would offer. take it or leave
And
it, you know?
there's no time on grieving. You have to grieve to your own time, and don't allow anyone to tell you how to grieve. I think that's the biggest issue. Folks tell other folks how to grieve. Like, you can't tell me how to grieve.
Exactly. Thank you. Yes.
All right, so we do like to call this moment a shameless plug. So you see your banner scrolling across the bottom here. So just let our viewers know, for one, any projects that you have coming up, anything that you want to drive traffic to, how they can reach you, utilize your services, if any. You have the stage.
Oh, thank you. Okay, I'll do my shameless plug. So everything is consolidated on my website, which is WTFJustHappened.net. There you can link to my book, which is on Amazon right now in paper and Kindle. And I'm in the middle of recording the audiobook. And the book is called WTF Just Happened, A Sciencey-Skeptic Explores Grief, Healing, and Evidence of an Afterlife. I am currently writing part 2. I have my podcast, WTF Just Happened, all about the afterlife. No woo. It's on all podcast apps. You can connect to it through my website. And also, you can, on my website, I mentioned I host science and spirituality events like brunches, dinners, whatever you want, where you can get a talk from me about science and a reading with a scientifically certified medium. So you can reach out to me about all of that. You can reach out to me about just any questions, any concerns. Contact me on, I'm really active on Instagram, and you can also email me, and you can connect to both of those through my website. And I sometimes will be a little slow just because I'm busy and I have another job too, but I'll get back to you, I promise. But if I haven't got back to you immediately, I promise I will. So, and I'd love to hear from any of you with any questions, comments, anything.
Okay. Well, you do respond fast. I didn't have too many issues out of the
Oh,
response.
good.
So, look,
Good.
Messenger, Facebook, or IG for me. So that worked good. But really quick, how can folks become a guest on your podcast? Or go through your website and email you for those that want to be a guest on WTF Just Happened podcast.
Yeah, email me, reach out to me on Instagram. We'll most likely we'll have a quick call just to see if it's the right match for the podcast. And yeah, in general, we're looking for people who have very either work in this field and have strong evidence of an afterlife or have personal experiences. So, if you think you could, always reach out. I always want to hear from you no matter what.
All right. Thank you so much, Liz, for being a guest on Unfiltered, Unspoken podcast. It was an honor to have you.
Thank
So, oh, sorry.
I was just going to say thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
It's an honor. It's an honor. We brought something different, and I love the piece that you showed folks, that there's no time limit on grieving, and losing a parent is tough and it's hard, especially being a single child and you don't have siblings to go to. So that loneliness by yourself. Well, mom, you have mommy too, but you have to uplift her as well. So I can just only imagine that piece of it as well. So we want to thank you for tuning into Unfiltered Unspoken podcast, where we're going to continue to share life experiences of others of all different walks, all different traumas. If we can gain anything out of this, of which Liz just mentioned, is take your time grieving. No one can tell you how to grieve. And if you are seeing signs or visitation of the afterlife, don't ignore them. After, for those that believe, because I do believe in afterlife, it's important. Pay attention to the signs, and don't ignore them. And if you want to do more studies from the resources, what were the fella from Virginia, so
Oh,
folks
yeah.
can check them out, Liz?
Yeah, Dr. Jim Tucker, Dr. Bruce Grayson. If you go to the University of Virginia Division of Perceptual Studies, they're filled there. Their whole list, the Windbridge Institute and the Forever Family Foundation, where I also volunteer. If you go to the list of the the people who work for them, they have a whole list of scientists as well. And once you start reading about one or two of them, you just start hearing about all of them.
Okay, there you go. You have it. So if you want to do more research, please chime in and check it out and get more information on it. So thank you for tuning into Unfiltered, Unspoken, where we're going to continue to share life experiences of others in hopes that you will connect so that you can start the journey to healing. You have a blessed day.